building more and more and more settlements, just expanding them throughout the occupied Palestinian territories, where Palestinians saw the prospect for a Palestinian state shrinking by the day on the ground. They understood that this entire process was a sham, and the fact that Israeli restrictions were increasing, Israeli violence was ongoing, it became clear that this was not going to be a path in which Palestinians can get a real state. And that's when you got the shift in public opinion back in terms of supporting for armed resistance as the only way, because clearly Israel could not be talked into seeing Palestinians as equal human beings and granting them.
But then what now?
Well, a shorter version maybe for Stephen to respond to is that the way to defeat Hamas is through peace, not war. What's wrong with that?
It sounds really brutal, but the issue is that the unlimited amount of international support for the Palestinians means the Palestinians will never look to peace. They shouldn't. They always have an unlimited reservoir internationally of people who will encourage the delusions that if they continue to fight, they're going to get a better deal. It's the reason why they walked away in 2000 from Camp David. It's the reason why they walked away from the Taba Summit. It's the reason why Abbas walked away in 2008 from Ulmert. It's the reason why the Oslo Accords were never negotiated in 93. That period of violence that he's talking about from 93 to 2000, where the Israelis were continuing to expand settlements into the West Bank, is true, but Palestinians also continue to engage in terrorist activities. A lot of people didn't trust Arafat because Arafat would sign on to a deal for the Oslo Accords, and then he would go over to Switzerland and he'd make speeches in universities about how, like, yeah, we agree to this now, but, you know, we're going to get them as soon as we got a little bit, we're going to take more, which is ironically what they've accused Israel of doing for the past 100 years. I think that in order for this conflict to actually start to reach some kind of resolution, I think that, again, it sounds mean, but Palestinians need to feel like they have something at stake. And it looks like they do, but in reality, politically, Palestinians have never lost anything because people continue to make them feel as though they can always go back to borders that existed 80 years ago. People will constantly say, you just said it here, what's the fair thing? They only want a sliver of this land, 1/5 of the territory. Yeah, they tried like 3, 4, 5 different wars to get more, and they lost. You can't continue to go back to the first try over and over and over again and demand the deal that was on the table before. You walked away from the partition plan in 47. You can't go to war 5 times and then keep going back to another set of borders. They're always one generation behind when it comes to accepting some type of actual peace deal. So as long as Palestinians have people like Omar internationally that will support them in an unlimited delusion to fight forever, Palestinians will never try to accept this. And they shouldn't. They really should. There's no reason to.
Yeah. So, but Omar, just what, in one sense, if you have public polling that shows some 70%, this was from a Palestinian polling firm in December, 72% supported what happened on October 7th. So, and we can talk about why, and we will, I'm sure. So with all of that said, what now? What if if you were in charge of Israeli foreign policy in a hypothetical sense? And I think this will be a response to what Stephen just said. What happens now to get to a position where, to your point, there can be justice?
I'm happy to address that, but I have to go back to a particular point. The idea that Palestinians are rejectionists because they have so much international support, I think is just thoroughly absurd. Palestinians are paying an unbelievable cost every single day. Their lives are completely brutalized under occupation, and the idea that they see no cost to continuing to fighting on forever is just completely ridiculous. It's detached from reality. It's as if you're unaware of what Palestinian conditions are under Israeli occupation. The reason why they were willing to bend over backwards, I mean, if you look at the history of negotiations, you look at the Palestine papers that got leaked shortly after, I think back in the mid-2000s, it's obvious that Palestinians were bending over backwards to try to make that deal work. And Israel insisted on expanding more and more settlements. And yes, you can say that Palestinian violence was ongoing at the time, but so was Israeli violence. I mean, the attack that happened on the mosque in Hebron, where nearly 30 Palestinians were killed by a Jewish terrorist named Baruch Goldstein, that happened during the so-called peace process. And Israel responded by putting Palestinians in Hebron under curfew to prevent any possible retaliation. Those are the conditions, but nobody looks at that incident and says, oh, well, there was Israeli violence, therefore the Israelis, we're not, that's the reason why they can't.
All over Israeli history. There's a massacre in Hebron in 29 where a bunch of Palestinian Arabs killed.
The point I'm making is that this is besides the point, that yes, we can point to individual atrocities, and that does not change the fact that throughout the peace process, if Israel were genuinely interested in allowing for a Palestinian state to exist, they would not have spent the entire so-called peace process taking up more and more and more of the West Bank. So it's the disingenuous nature of Israeli policy that's the reason why this is a problem. Now, to your point of what now?
Yes, say they are genuinely interested in the peace process, and you're in charge.
Yeah.
What do they do?
Right now, we have a situation, right? There is a problem of the fact that the overwhelming majority of Palestinians support groups like Hamas. You have a majority of people in Israel, overwhelming majority, support the most vicious policies of the Netanyahu.
Why did you say Israel has never done anything wrong? You paid off permaban. See ya. You haven't listened to a single thing I've said. Nice try, though.
Government and just carrying on, and they think that they're not going far enough in Gaza and so on. And that's just, it's important to know that hatred is a symptom of the conflict and not the cause of it. People get this stuff backwards. When you think of apartheid in South Africa, there was plenty of hostility. And we eventually had a reconciliation process between white and black people in South Africa, but only after apartheid fell. That's when you can have reconciliation. But the idea that you can try to work on how people feel about each other in the midst of one side occupying the other, controlling every aspect of their lives and brutalizing them day in and day out, there's no surprise that there are hostile feelings. And yes, when Palestinians do respond with violence, Israelis who are out of touch with the reasons why all of this is happening are going to develop hostile feelings as well. This is a moment in which the international community has to step in. This is not about making Israelis and Palestinians like each other right now. This is about making sure that one side does not get to dominate the other until the end of time. And the status quo leading up to October 7th is one in which Israel dominated every aspect of Palestinian life. So you can say, yes, both sides hate each other, but one side is in charge of everything. One side gets to decide whether they want to put the people of Gaza on a diet, as they were talking about, when they first imposed the siege on Gaza. just Palestinians don't get to decide how much food Israelis get. They don't get to demolish Israeli homes at will whenever they feel like it. They don't get to humiliate Israelis at checkpoints day in and day out. So because there's a dynamic in which one side is imposing an illegal occupation over another people and taking over their land, that has to come to an end, and you can bring it to an end through international pressure, primarily from the United States as the country that has the most.
Without knowing anything about the conflict, I feel like these people are just trying to are just lying to destiny when they compare this conflict to South Africa. The comparison to Africa, it was an intentional Palestinian strategy that I don't know if the Soviets encouraged it or if Arafat encouraged it or what, but a lot of the people in Palestine started to fashion themselves. First, it was off of Algeria, as the Algerians fought off France and basically kicked the colonization efforts out of there. And then it was after South Africa. There was a very intentional Palestinian strategy in the, I want to say in the 70s, relating to this idea. When did the French like colonization or occupation or whatever of Algeria end? Regardless, I know that there were a lot of comparisons to independence in 62, so 60s, 70s. There's a lot of comparisons to stuff going on in Africa for the Palestinian stuff.
Leverage over Israel to say not another penny until that occupation ends. And when that occupation comes to an end, we can talk about sorting out the exact specifics of how we get more conciliation and cooperation between Palestinians and Israelis.
And when it comes to international support for Palestinians, there's one side that has had the international support of the world's great superpower, and the political and military support as well, Israel.
What about the Soviet Union supporting the Arab states?
The Soviet Union has had a very complicated relationship.
To be clear, the Soviet Union,
also, the Soviet Union has not.
States before.
I hated that answer. God, what a weak answer. Well, it's complicated. God, that was so cringe.
Soviet Union.
God, that triggered the fuck out of me.
Support as well, Israel.
What about the Soviet Union supporting the Arab states?
The Soviet Union has had a very complicated relationship.
To be clear, the Soviet Union,
also, the Soviet Union has
Arab
not.
states before the United States didn't truly start supporting Israel until about 66, 67.
The Soviet Union also hasn't been here since
That's true,
1991.
but the conflict also didn't start after the 91, after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
The point is, Israel
Why would he try to do this to me? Oh, that drove me crazy. Well, the Soviet Union collapsed. Okay, yeah, and what? Israel didn't start in 1991? What a bizarre fucking thing to say. Ugh.
a lot of agency, and Benjamin Netanyahu in particular, as the prime minister for most of the last 25, 30 years, has had an extraordinary amount of agency as well. And I wanted to read to you a piece of an essay published in Haaretz recently by Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari. He writes, given the murderous nature of Hamas, this time its allies gave Israel free rein for many months to conquer Gaza, liberate the Israeli hostages, change the situation in the Strip according to Israel's best judgment, and create a new order in the region. The Netanyahu government wasted this historic opportunity and also wasted the bravery and dedication of the soldiers of the IDF. The Netanyahu government failed to exploit its battlefield victories to reach an agreement on the release of all the hostages and to advance an alternative political order in Gaza. Instead, it decided to knowingly inflict on Gaza an unnecessary humanitarian disaster, and in so doing, inflicted on Israel an unnecessary political disaster. One by one, our allies have become horrified by what is happening in Gaza, and one by one, they are calling for an immediate ceasefire and even for a weapons embargo on Israel. Even during the worst moments of October 7th, Hamas was nowhere near vanquishing Israel. But the ruinous policy of the Netanyahu government following October 7th has placed Israel in existential danger. So when I ask you, it seems like a pretty fundamental irony that if Israel had listened to critics like Omar and myself after October 7th, who warned against enacting violence just for the purposes of revenge and potentially for ethnic cleansing of Gaza, they would ironically and paradoxically be in a much stronger global strategic political position.
One of the bad things that Israel has done, that Destiny has criticized, I don't really follow all the streams, but every time I tune in, it seems he feels the Palestinians are mostly at fault. Because right now I think they are mostly at fault. Just because they're mostly at fault doesn't mean Israel hasn't done bad things. I mean, bad things since when? I mean, like, from what point? Like, I think that Israel wasn't aware of the political realities of their neighbors, so sometimes they were a little bit too harsh when they could have probably found alliances, especially with Jordan prior to the 67 war. There were times when Israel's reprisals over in the West Bank were too harsh for King Hussein not to respond. I think that's probably the reason why he got sucked into the war, the Six-Day War. After 67, Israel didn't try hard enough to actually pursue peace, even though there probably was an opportunity to do it. Saddam himself was delivering peace overtures to Golda Meir, and she literally shot them down because Israel was literally high off their own supply after winning in 67. After 73, once peace talks began between Egypt and between Israel, and the Palestinians got kicked out of that negotiation, I think that Begin's approach to peace with the Middle East in terms of his capsule diplomacy, where he thought he could isolate every single individual Middle Eastern country, was correct in practice, but it was wrong in theory, in that it worked, but it didn't actually solve the Palestinian problem, which they thought would just go away. That never ended up actually happening. There are probably times where peace could have been pursued with Syria, but I think Rabin walked away from it because he just wasn't wasn't confident, and by the time he reapproached it later on, the Syrian leadership was, I think Hafez was basically on his deathbed, and he just wanted to make sure that the country would pass nicely into Syria. So Israel missed an opportunity there. I think that expansion into the West Bank has completely, totally Israel's ability to like make a lasting peace with the Palestinians, because now they're going to have to withdraw hundreds of thousands of settlers to ever actually seal the deal on that land. I think that Israel probably needs to start pursuing peace deals, big peace deals, when their prime ministers are already so like politically fragile, or they need to have like a little bit more time before the end of their administration, because apparently whoever you're negotiating with on the Palestinian side is going to take longer and longer and longer to negotiate until your term expires, and then it'll go the next thing. I think that Israel, I mean, I don't know, there's I don't know, there's a ton of criticisms. What do you mean? There's criticism from both sides.
Than they are now, where they're facing not just isolation, but charges before the ICJ and potentially before the ICC. So are they making a mistake in following kind of the more bellicose advice that they're getting from their so-called allies?
That's a touching essay. Who was the alternative order politically besides Hamas that would have risen up in the Gaza Strip? If there was an alternative political order, I would love to hear it. Even in the West Bank, there's a reason why Abbas suspended elections 20 years ago. Even in the West Bank, Hamas enjoys pretty broad support.
I mean, there are answers to this question. It's not rhetorical. Do you want to take that?
I mean,
well, also, hold on, wait. Well, before he does,
Sure.
also to elaborate a bit on the military objectives, I think Hamas needs to go. I don't think that there's any future that happens where Israel can negotiate anything, whether it's peace or war, with Hamas remaining as the government in the Gaza Strip. I don't think any of the surrounding Arabs...
Ryan, I just realized I didn't want to give him a chance to yap. I wanted to say sure. I think Ryan threw that over to Omar because he had no clue how to answer that question, and Omar had no clue either. Wait, well, who do we put besides Hamas? I just realized that. Oh, shit.
Even in the West Bank, Hamas enjoys pretty broad support.
I mean, there are answers to this question. It's not rhetorical. Do you want to take that?
I mean,
well, also, hold on, wait. Well, before he does...
There is no answer to that question. What?
Also to elaborate a bit on the military objectives, I think Hamas needs to go. I don't think that there's any future that happens where Israel can negotiate anything, whether it's peace or war, with Hamas remaining as the government in the Gaza Strip. I don't think any of the surrounding Arab states wanted Hamas to remain as the government in the Gaza Strip. It's a disaster. You've had a series of conflicts. In 2008, you had Gazled. 2014, you had Protective Edge. 2018, you had the response to the Great March of Return. And now in 2023, you had a massive attack on October 7th. The idea that you would just allow them to stay here after spending at least a year preparing for what was probably, I think, the single largest day of violence against Jews since the Holocaust, that's an untenable position. I don't think a single other country or person in all of human history would be asked to keep a government like that in place.
Can we pause for 1 second on the quote response to the Great March of Return? For people who don't know, the Great March of Return was a civil society-led Gaza initiative that was a nonviolent demonstration where every Friday people...
It is crazy to me listening to these shows now. This is why I don't trust anybody on anything. The only reason I know every single thing is because I've read every single fucking document that comes up in this debate. If I hadn't read any of this, I would just assume it's true. Is there a single true thing being said anywhere? Like, wait, what? This is an unbelievable summary.
A civil society-led Gaza initiative that was a nonviolent demonstration where every Friday people would meet and kind of march to the fence, you know, symbolically gazing out at land that they had lost over the years. The IDF responded by killing a pretty significant amount of Palestinians, but also maiming, I believe, tens of thousands, to the point where the UN put out a report noting that it had become commonplace to see people walking around with one leg, missing a leg, missing an arm. There were IDF soldiers who said, yeah, we were told shoot out the legs. You know, one guy said he hit like 40 plus legs, like in a single day. Hamas.
By the way, those quotes, the two that I could find, one had to do with Ariel Sharon telling, I think it was when he was it Prime Minister during the Second Intifada, shooting legs? I think it was Sharon. There might have been one during the Great March of Return. Those things are in response to, like, don't kill them, don't headshot and blow them up, just shoot their legs or something. It's basically the thing being said. But now that's presented as being, like, too harsh and too evil. Like, oh, you're shooting out legs? That's horrible. It's like, okay, well, the alternative was that they blow their brains out, okay? I mean, like, what the fuck do you want?
Opposed this at the start because it was nonviolent, because it was civil society led. Hamas eventually caved under public pressure and ended up supporting the Great March of Return, which I think goes to your question: what is the political order that can replace Hamas? If there is a nonviolent movement that can gain traction, then Hamas is defeated by that. Hamas is pressured into supporting that just by the kind of public support for it, like happened with the Great March of Return. The Israeli response was not to say, wow, let's embrace this nonviolent civil society-led movement and marginalize Hamas and reach a deal with this Palestinian force that could even see a unification between the West Bank and Gaza toward a long-term peaceful solution. It was, let's annihilate this. Let's shoot and kill and maim the peaceful protesters, which only then fortifies Hamas's position and allows them to say, that we were right all along. We told you you can't deal with Israel. We warned you against this, that violence is the only way forward.
That's a fantastic retelling that is almost entirely fictional for the Great March of Return. It did start off as a generally peaceful protest. The idea behind the March of Return was returning to Israel.
That's an
The UN
invasion.
has released a report where they've gone over a lot of the shootings. It's very curious that if you actually read the entire report, you'll notice that almost every single shooting happens between 50 to 100 meters in range, which is curious. Why, if these are, because I was told, I believe by, I think Finkelstein himself said, or it might have been Rabbani, that this was a crack team of Israeli snipers, but apparently their rifles only worked up to 100 meters. The reason why
Maybe they're just lazy.
Or maybe the reason why is because there is a no-go zone between the fence and 100 meters, because when people get too close, people try to cut the fence open, people try to break through, which is what was happening towards the end of the
They have no
March.
choice but to shoot all those unarmed people.
It doesn't matter if you're armed or unarmed. If you're approaching an area that you're not supposed to be in, and then when people start to try to break through the fence, that's the rules of the border. If you try to cross any militarized border, you're probably going to get shot at. Also, towards the end of the Great March of Return, there were people that were throwing stones, that were sending over incendiary balloons, that were causing like fires to spread on the other side of the fence. All of this is documented.
God, I laid that trap. I laid the throwing stone trap, and they didn't bite because they were going to go throwing stones. One of the people that got killed in the Great March of Return got hit by a stone from friendly fire, by the way. I think the sling slung the stone and hit the dude in the head, in the back of the head, and fucking killed him, but nobody ate on that one.
By the UN, and that was when the majority of the firing from the Israeli police happened. If you want to say that they shouldn't be shooting at people who were close to the fence because you don't like that policy or whatever, that's fine. But characterizing that as like just open firing into a bunch of innocent people that are standing there with the goal of just maiming people for no reason is the most unbelievable retelling of what happened towards the end of that event.
It's exactly what happened, actually.
Just to characterize it.
Well, that's exactly what happened. Oh, and he realizes, oh, shit, I haven't read anything about it. I've only read the wiki.
Just get a even more complete picture. Israeli policy is people in Gaza have no right to go in and out of the cage that they've been placed into. They're under complete siege. Their economy is in shambles because Israel does not allow them to trade with the outside world. They can't have an airport because...
Also, this guy yaps on every random point. Now, I noticed this. It was too late towards the end. Or I think I started talking more towards the end. He doesn't actually respond to anything I say ever. He just has it's like all the talking points loaded up or whatever.
Israel doesn't feel like they are entitled to an airport, can't have a seaport.
During these debates, do you think you're fighting for one side or are you trying to approach the truth? I mean, because they're on one side so much, like it comes off as I'm on one side. I try to kind of like center it towards the end here, and I think I do. I guess we'll find out when I rewatch. Let me go grab a Red Bull. Use the restroom 1 second. Also, fuck the goatee haters. Okay, listen. I think it's coming back. Barely? Not barely, actually. I think they're finally turning black again. Hopefully, like within a month, they'll all be alive again. I don't know, my immune system hated my hair follicles. Listen, we're coming back, okay? It's almost here.
When you look at the rates of unemployment, over 50% in Gaza at the time, and if those people who are trapped in this cage come a little too close to the border, then we open fire at them and kill them even when they're unarmed, because that's border policy.
It's more than 6,000 according to the UN, quote unquote, more than 6,000 unarmed demonstrators.
My favorite part was when you got a laugh from what's her name for saying Omar was going to use the Finkelstein method of being wrong about everything. Oh yeah.
Were shot by military. It's more than 6,000 according to the UN, quote unquote, more than 6,000 unarmed demonstrators were shot by military snipers week after week at the protest sites on the separation fence.
There's no denying that, yes, some people try to open up and some people send incendiary balloons over the border and so on, but...
at least we admit that. Thank you. The incendiary balloons of the peaceful protesters. Thank you.
By and large, when you look at the cases, human rights organizations have been clear about the fact that people were targeted when they posed absolutely no threat to Israeli soldiers. So Israeli soldiers opened fire on people and targeted specifically medics and journalists and children and people who are disabled in wheelchairs.
It's a very clever game that's being played when we say pose no threat to Israeli soldiers. There was one UN report that came out that analyzed it, that claimed that every single shooting except for one was unjustified. But the way that they got that is they didn't analyze that as an armed conflict. They analyzed that as a policing event. And when you analyze things internationally as a policing event, typically police aren't allowed to shoot or kill anybody unless they pose a direct threat to the individual.
Yeah. Why would it be analyzed as an armed conflict if one side wasn't armed?
Because Hamas was present.
But they weren't shooting. They weren't.
It doesn't matter if they were shooting. If you've got an enemy,
and now they're pulling the destiny. I like this. There are 2 or 3 times I think in this debate where Grim goes to his laptop to find an answer to correct me, and you know what? They couldn't correct me, and they even told me that you have to leave your bag outside. They didn't even want me to bring my iPad in. They didn't realize. Okay, I've memorized everything. All my notes are in my brain. I don't need an iPad. I don't need a laptop. I don't need notes. Okay.
It's because Hamas was present.
But they weren't shooting. It
doesn't matter if they were shooting. If you've got an enemy military that is present amongst people that are performing actions that are Hamas is considered the oppositional force, and if you've got people that are participating,
and if you don't have guns at the time,
doesn't matter if you have guns or not.
Of course,
guns have nothing to do with being
international humanitarian law is absolutely clear about the fact that a situation you can only kill combatants if they're in combat and they're armed. You can't find somebody.
That is absolutely not true. You do not become oyster combat. You do not all of a sudden gain the protections of a civilian if you're an enemy combatant without a gun.
If you happen to go home, of course you do. You should familiarize yourself with international humanitarian
IHL, enemy combatant, Google IHL,
Yes, let's do that.
That is
But
absolutely
just to go back to a point that you made earlier about sort of.
Wait, hold on, just to be clear, I just want to so you're saying that like if there's a military and you're fighting the enemy and you guys are going to lose, if you just drop your guns, you can just like run back and nobody can shoot you?
If you drop your guns and raise your arms, you can't be shot
that's
anymore.
surrendering. That's different than running away. You can't drop your guns and just run away and you can't get shot because you have no firearms.
If you're a military threat at the time, it's a military engagement.
That's not true. That is absolutely not true.
Okay, I just see.
Ryan's fact-checking. Ryan's
We can have a
fact-checking.
control room look this up.
Sure,
but
you're gonna do it.
you're wrong about this. Yeah.
Look it up. I'll tell you what to Google.
That's a level of detail again. You start like playing up imaginary scenarios of somebody shooting at you and then dropping their gun and turning around.
No, but that's what your rule would lead to. We have to be able to analyze. Like, this is the problem. We can't even acknowledge like the basic realities of our conflict.
This brings up a really fundamental reality, actually, because Omar was talking about airports and the seaports, and I think we all agree it would be miserable to live in a territory that doesn't have an airport, doesn't have a seaport.
It's a mistake when you impugn the sincerity of your opponents and snicker, even when they attack you personally and make hypocritical points. Win the war of optics. It's your main Achilles heel. I disagree. I think that there's always some of you on both sides that will like see things. If I'm too aggressive, you say it's bad. If I'm too passive, you say it's bad. I'm going to strike a more aggressive balance in these debates when it's basically, I'll say, I'm not going to say 3v1 because Emily never sided against me, but it's at the very least like a pretty decent 2v1. Okay, I'm not going to let people like make like completely wrong points and then not get called out on it, and then also like imply that I'm racist and then go to Twitter afterwards and shit on me and like be totally cordial during the debate. No, fuck no. I came into this with the goal of taking a slightly more aggressive position, and that was my goal, and I think I did, and I'm happy with that. I'm fine with that. I think I'd even said as much. Less hedging, more certainty with factual disagreements, more aggressive than general conversations, trying to respond to everything, incredibly firm with factual foundations for claims, force them to acknowledge when I made a correct point. That's what I just did there. I was like, hold on, wait a second. When you drop a gun, you think you just don't get shot anymore? Forcing them to take strong positions. I don't think we've gotten to that part yet where, yeah, no, this is my goal of coming to this. I'm fine with that. I'm like, no, fuck you.
The argument from Israel and supporters of Israel is that if you put an airport in Gaza, Hamas would immediately seize it and use it to use parts, use the technologies to kill Israelis.
Yeah, and nobody asks if you have an airport in Israel, will the Israeli government use it to import weapons from the United States that they then use to kill Palestinians? You see, there's an inequality here that we never really acknowledge.
And I don't think that's unfair. I just mean, so what is, like now? What is the path to creating a Gaza that can have an airport?
Do we think Hamas would use the airport and the seaport to bring in weapons?
I have no doubt that they would, exactly in the same way the Israeli government imports weapons and commits massive atrocities. Their terrorism against Palestinians.
What can people in Palestine do to create a situation where that's not, and what can people in Israel do, frankly, to create a situation that's different?
And to Stephen's earlier point, that which we did not address, is like, you know, he thinks the goal of removing Hamas from power is absolutely essential and you've got to do it. First, I want to point out that double standard. There's nobody says we have to get rid of the Israeli government.
Because the Israeli government is infinitely better than Hamas.
It's not. It's not by any.
Better in what sense? Better in what sense?
It's better in that it's a democracy. Better in that it responds to international global pressure. Better in that their goal isn't the entire annihilation of a group of people. If you think that
it absolutely is their absolute intention is the absolute erasure of Palestinians.
Then how is it the Palestinian population has exploded in the Gaza Strip over the past?
Because they're doing it in slow motion. There's
slow motion going the opposite way. Is it like when you go faster than light and you go backwards through time?
That's a very, very cute talking point. But when you look at what actually Israeli policy has been for literally decades. It's been confining Palestinians to smaller and smaller areas. You can see it unfolding.
What does slow motion mean? How slow are we going here? What?
Of Gaza, they've just given up on Gaza. They basically besieged the entire thing. It's a cage. Palestinians can do whatever they want there. They don't care about Gaza anymore, and that's how they wanted to leave it. In the case of the West Bank, they absolutely are squeezing Palestinians into smaller and smaller areas. So you can talk about the Palestinian population increasing in terms of numbers, but they're in the areas that Israel is interested in taking over. They're absolutely decreasing. When you look at Jerusalem, every few years you look at it, and the number of Palestinians in Jerusalem is actually decreasing. It's a deliberate policy of pushing Palestinians out. But so from my perspective, when you look at
the number of Palestinians is decreasing, are you saying because some of them are getting citizenship for Israel now? Because Israel
no, because Israel is demolishing their homes and replacing them, and in some cases you see it actually on video of Palestinian families being thrown out of their homes in East Jerusalem.
Oh, this is the one talking point that I don't know what the Arab population in East and West Jerusalem over time. I don't know that. I don't know the number of that. So, Arab population in East Jerusalem. Jesus Christ. 61% of the population is Arab/Palestinian, 39% is Jewish. What was it before? I don't even know if I could find numbers like this. Like, Arab population in East Jerusalem over time. It wouldn't surprise me if the percentage has decreased, maybe. But the numbers have increased because more Jews are moving to East Jerusalem. I don't know if Jews moved to East Jerusalem or not. I don't know how common that is.
Jerusalem and Jewish settlers come and take over those.
There is citizenship available for every person living even in East Jerusalem. There's a lot of people that don't want it because they don't want to be part of Israel. Right? Do you think, real quick, because you mentioned between the Hamas and the IDF, do you think if Hamas ran Israel and...
Oh, and this is it. Forcing your opponents to take a strong position? I'm glad that I asked this question. Oh, I'm glad. I need to ask more questions like this.
be part of Israel.
Okay, and-
right? Do you think, well, real quick, because you mentioned between the Hamas and the IDF, do you think if Hamas ran Israel and Jews lived in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, do you think the situation would look the same, or do you think Hamas would treat them worse?
I have no idea.
To take a
That's-
guess, you couldn't possibly
What would it look like to be treated worse than Gaza
Oh, what a stupid question. Well, I can't imagine. Whoa.
is being treated now?
A million times. It could be actual starvation. It could be actual dying.
There is actual starvation in Gaza.
So
People are
look,
dying by the dozens
I
in Gaza
understand
have
we've
already
had that.
died.
I wish I brought a list of me. I have like 52 different stories between October and now where verge of famine, imminent mass starvation, almost famine, about to start. It's been happening for
and
6
I don't
months.
know,
And prior to this, people say it's been happening for 20 years.
Dozens of children dying.
If you go
from
by
famine
Al
related-
Jazeera reports, the number is 32. And that's the most favorable.
But do you know
Al
what it takes?
Jazeera re-reporting the Gazan health.
So that's acceptable for you.
I didn't say it was
that's a
acceptable.
humane
I'm just saying
policy.
I also think it's a little annoying that I feel like this guy's yapped for most of the time, even with me talking faster, and I feel like he cuts me off on almost everything. One talking point that I have a problem with, which is annoying because I already talk very quickly. Sometimes somebody says something and it'll light up like a web of like 6 things in my head, and I want to get every single one of them out while still like advancing my point, but I end up steamrolling on everything, and I shouldn't. I should focus because it sounds like I end up just like mumble fucking like a cluster of words out when it's important that I get out every single thing, but I feel like I'm always going to get interrupted. I need to stop thinking that's going to happen, even though he is interrupting me. Yeah, like if somebody's going to say something like, oh, look how many people have died in Palestine, my answer is going to be something like, because in my mind, all of a sudden, like 5 other countries pop up. But then I also want to say all these countries have had these things and you don't know any of those numbers. And what it comes out as is like, oh, you think the Palestinian thing is bad? What about all of the deaths in Syria? That's been like 300,000, and then the Yemen stuff has been like 80,000, and you think that that's okay, right? When I should like go from like place to place to place to place to place, and then do the thing. But I always feel like I'm gonna get cut off. But I do get cut off. I just need to keep talking. I just say, please let me finish. That's a good one. I need to use that more when I'm speaking to people. Please let me finish, because usually people let you.
Most favorable.
But do you know
Al
what it takes?
Jazeera re-reporting the Gazan health.
So that's acceptable for you.
I didn't say it was
that's a
acceptable. I'm
humane
just saying
policy
the
as far as you're
idea that
concerned.
this place has been starved for decades, and we have 32 possibly deaths to show for it.
You're
is when
conflating
independent-
things.
when the,
You're once again conflating
not
things.
conflating
They have
anything. I
not
ask you a
been
very simple
starving
question that you're not
Gaza.
going to answer, which is if Hamas ran Israel, do you think that the treatment would be better, worse,
I
or
don't
about
see
the
the
same?
point of speculating about things that
Because
we
you
have
said,
no idea what
you
it's
said
going
that
to
the
be like.
IDF is worse than Hamas.
Yes, in terms of the scale of the atrocities they committed,
So in
there's
terms
no
of
question.
okay, so in that case, you agree that the United States is worse than Hamas, and that basically every single large country is worse than Hamas because of the scale of the country.
I think the genocidal campaign that Israel is currently engaged in Gaza is kind of unique. It's not commonplace for countries to engage in that level of violence.
When you say that, does October 7th count as genocidal, or
let me just
Doesn't answer that one. I should have focused on that again. I should have punched that again. Fuck! I should have punched that again. I don't think I asked him. Was October 7th genocidal?
I just want to know. It's fascinating.
You're so good at saying so many things
No, I'm not saying
having me chase the ball into different directions.
Let me just be very clear, and then you can answer my question.
Sure.
Okay? I am not saying so many things. I will ask a very clear question. You won't engage, and then you're going to yap about a whole bunch of unrelated stuff like genocidal campaigns. I'll read it one more time. You're not going to answer. I understand. My very clear question was: if Hamas was in control of Israel, and then the IDF in Israel was in control of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, do we think that Hamas, who would now own nuclear weapons and a full military and everything, would they be treating the Jews better or worse than the Jews are treating the Palestinians?
Yeah, and my answer is I don't know.
Okay, of course.
So, you mentioned
That's a wild answer. I hope people see that. That's a wild answer. I have no with the Sunni fundamentalist Islamic jihadist party, with these guys who constantly make calls for global jihad against the Israelis. Would they be treating them like? I'm not sure about that one. I don't know. What is the Hamas equivalent to Haaretz? Where is the Hamas Bet Salem? Like, come on. We need a bad historian, and they show an obvious inability to contextualize information coherently. Does it kill some of the credibility you attribute to professional academics? No, you just have to be aware that some people are full of shit and some people aren't, right? Keep in mind that, like, I might say things on this stream like, oh, fucking PhDs and academics and blah, 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 but a lot of my research comes from PhDs. Benny Morris is a historian, right? The World War I book we're reading right now is written by a historian. A lot of the documents and stuff we go through are by, like, credentialed, authored people. So, you know, some are bad, some are good, just like every profession. Except for streamers. They're all bad. And rapists. And trans.
that Hamas has to go. I think the Israeli government has to go by that logic. And the question then becomes, what cost would be acceptable to impose on Israeli civilians in order to get the Israeli government out of power? Would you impose starvation and all that? Of course, nobody would endorse that. Everybody understands that that's a completely monstrous idea for a government that has committed far greater atrocities than Hamas has. And then you have the second point of, if you want to get rid of Hamas, it might be useful to ask yourself how Hamas came into being. How did they come about? How did they get support? And it's obvious that brutality towards Palestinians is how Hamas came into being, because they created it literally. And it's you know, even if you want to leave out the part where Netanyahu was effectively indulging their existence as a means of dividing.
Oh, I just thought of a really good talking point. Fuck. What has been the largest single day of casualties inflicted on the Palestinians since the war started? Was it as big as October 7th? Has there been a single day where more than 1,200 people have died?
Palestinians, Israeli politicians have been quite explicit about the fact that they see this as a useful policy to prevent a Palestinian state from existing. But Hamas gained support as an alternative to the Palestinian Authority that was pliant, that was bending over backwards to try to accommodate Israel. And they said, no, 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 we can get you freedom because we're going to fight. And that's how they gain power. And if your idea is to defeat Hamas and get them out of power by brutalizing Palestinians even more, that's just completely delusional. Even if you get rid of Hamas as an organization, whatever replaces it, whether they call themselves Hamas or not, you're creating another generation of traumatized people who are going to be desperate for revenge, and you're just basically perpetuating conflict forever.
That was the point that I was making earlier. Some of the founders of Hamas, as children, lived through massacres in Gaza in the 1950s. This is well-known history. It doesn't justify what they did, but it raises questions about whether or not tactically, strategically, those massacres worked to Israel's benefit. Now, if you are Netanyahu and you want to divide Palestinians and the extremists are good for you, then it does work to their benefit. But if you're trying to defeat Hamas or the ideology of kind of armed resistance to Israel,
and if you really want a two-state solution,
but if you really want a solution to this crisis, then why would more cowbell, like more violence, why would that finally work?
I don't think more or less violence will work. There has to be.
We could try less. We've tried more.
It's not less. Hasn't. Of the entire history of the Palestinian people against Israel since '48 has been one of violence, nonstop.
All right.
Do you acknowledge that? I should have asked for that. Do you acknowledge that? Do you acknowledge that? Do you accept that? Do I ask that? Do I force them to acknowledge that?
The idea that, like, if you're just peaceful for a little bit, it'll fix things isn't going to work. The Palestinian people don't want peace. They want justice. And in their mind right now, justice has to do with acquiring some amount of Israel. Now, whether that is the entirety of Israel into a single state or whether that's a two-state solution, again...
But that's not acquiring parts of Israel. If you're talking about two states, that's acquiring occupied territory that is not Israel's, and Israel has to withdraw from.
It's not anybody's. What do you mean it's not Israel's?
It does not belong to Israel.
Who does it belong to?
International law is extremely clear about the fact that they have to withdraw from that territory.
International law is not extremely clear. What are you talking
about? It is extremely clear.
You're going to reference a single advisory opinion written by the UN in 2004, and they had a one-paragraph treatment.
He hasn't read that advisory opinion. He has no idea what international law is, and that's why they always vaguely reference things. They never reference exact things, okay? When I first started getting into this stuff, like 6 months ago, my biggest fear for these conversations was that I was going to be getting buried by people who were more well-read than me. That it was going to be like, oh, are you familiar with this or that or that? And I'm like, fuck, I'm not. I'm really not. I thought it was going to be like my Ryan Dawson conversation. And even Ryan Dawson didn't really bury me. He was just a guy that had done 1 week of research against me who'd done 1 day of research. That debate that we had about the Middle East like fucking 7 years ago. Christ. I don't understand what these guys do with all their time. At the very least, I can understand Ryan and Emily because they're just like, they're journalists. But like, if Omar has been studying this issue forever, like I feel like he should be able to demolish me. Like, oh, well, it wasn't just the 2004 advisory opinion. Technically, there was a blah, 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 blah. It's like, what do you mean?
No, you mean and mountain of UN resolutions that make absolutely clear that Israel has no right to be the occupied territory.
Yeah, and resolutions.
Before we get into the resolutions, since you raised the virtue of the Israeli government, I did want to ask if you had seen the Plus 972 article on the
where did the drop your gun and become oars to combat? Where did that go?
Lavender AI program. I imagine you saw this.
Yeah, I read through it a bit.
So let me read you a little portion of it. So the IDF used artificial intelligence to identify Hamas members. It used to be that you had to be, I think, colonel or above to be, specifically targeted by an airstrike, and there had to be some precautions taken to minimize the civilians that you might be around. The IDF, after October 7th, got rid of both of those precautions. They said any Hamas member is now able to be targeted by an airstrike, and civilian casualties don't matter. In fact, maximizing civilian casualties seems to be a feature of the program. I'll just read from this, if you can put up the 972 magazine article. They write, during the early stages of the war, the Army gave sweeping approval for officers to adopt Lavender's kill lists with no requirement to thoroughly check why the machine made.
I also like how every single article they have like saved is against me, and and they've got like clips of Twitter saved against me. It's like, that's fine. I'm here to debate. I flew in. Listen, I caught a flight at 5 a.m. to come to DC just for this conversation. Okay, you can throw whatever you want at me.
Choices, or to examine the raw intelligence on which they were based. One source stated that human personnel often served only as a, quote, rubber stamp for the machine's decisions, adding that normally they would personally devote only about 20 seconds to each target before authorizing a bombing, just to make sure the Lavender-marked target...
The woman is conservative. Isn't she on your side? Is she? I feel like she only brought up one, like, factual thing the whole debate. I feel like it was pointed towards me. Although she doesn't, like, attack me a lot, but she just, like, yeah.
It's male. This was despite knowing that the system...
Did you read this magazine before you went? Yeah, I read it. I just don't care. This, like, dumb, like, AI... Like, AI is just, like, a buzzword for fucking everything scary. Like, I'm willing to bet that prior to this, like, there were different algorithms that militaries employed. Like, AI... Yeah. In order to, like, select targets and shit. AI has become, like, the new catch-all for, like, scary internet shit. Like, prior to this, it was algorithms. Okay? Algorithms and formulas and algorithms and everything is algorithmic and algorithms and algorithms and algorithms. And now it's, like, AI, and the AI and the AI. It's just, like... It's just like the new like buzzword for to be scared of things.
Makes what are regarded as errors in approximately 10% of cases, and is known to occasionally mark individuals who have merely a loose connection to militant groups or no connection at all. Moreover, the Israeli army systematically attacked the targeted individuals while they were in their homes, usually at night while their whole families were present.
Did they really disallow you from using your iPad? No, that's not true. I loaded that a little bit. But when I showed up with my bag, they said like, oh, you can leave your bag outside. I'm sure if I would have asked, like, can I please bring in my iPad? Maybe they would have said yes. I didn't actually take my house, but listen, just let me have my heroic myth, all right?
Rather than during the course of military activity. According to the sources, this was because, from what they regarded as an intelligence...
Omar and Ryan also slapped me up in the hallway, too, when I was coming in. They gave me a good punch in the stomach. They stabbed me. It was like Gladiator. They stabbed me in the stomach, and they were like, good luck in your fight. And then they threw me into the arena.
Standpoint, it was easier to locate the individuals in their private houses. Additional automated systems, including one called Where's Daddy, also revealed here for the first time, were used specifically to track the targeted individuals and carry out bombings when they had entered their families' residences. And 972 argues that the reason that you've seen so many women and children killed is that they were identifying men. Sometimes something like 10 to 20% of men in Gaza are named Mohammed. Like if you go through the Ministry of Health list of casualties. Many of them have same last names.
I should have said right here, that's kind of racist, dude.
Because they're from the same family. So they're using AI to identify a particular man and then follow him to his home and then killing him with a bomb in his home. Oftentimes, this is an apartment that doesn't just have his family sleeping there, but also has many other families sleeping there.
Which is where the Where's Daddy name comes from that program. They wait for them to be with their families, and they think it's easier to bomb them in their homes rather than try to fight them in the field, and where they're more difficult to find.
Well, so how could because of the field, like?
So how could this be worse? Like you try to design a government that behaves in a worse way than this.
The obvious counter is the numbers don't support the idea that civilians are being targeted en masse. It doesn't even come close to it. I've seen estimates at anywhere it's like 9 to 1 for civilian to military deaths historically in conflict. And the idea that in the Gaza Strip, one of the most densely populated places,
like right there, like I'm talking, he almost just I'm barely getting into my answer. He just yapped for like 3 minutes.
For civilian to military deaths historically in conflict. And the idea that in the Gaza Strip, one of the most densely populated places on the planet, those numbers right now are, depending on whose estimate, anywhere from 2.5 to 1 to like 4 to 1 in terms of civilian to militant deaths. So the idea that people are being wiped out with innocent family members, there just don't seem to be any numbers at all to support that. Something that's also very frustrating is...
Wait, support for 9 to 1? I don't actually know. I need to look that figure up more. There was I did Hassan research for this one. It was, this guy mentions that as a point of reference, according to the UN, civilians usually make up around 90% of casualties in war. That's a 1-to-9 ratio, 1 combatant for every 9 civilians. I guess we should try to find the report. Where does the UN say this? UN, civilian to military casualty in war. 90% of wartime, when is this? This is from May 25th, 2022. 90% of wartime casualties are civilians. Speakers stress pressing Security Council to fulfill responsibility, protect innocent people in conflict. This is a press release, so I don't know if there's an underlying report that this is sourcing from, or if it's just a thing that they put out, but there you go. It's the UN. It's the UN's website. It's a title from them.
Hamas engages in behavior that has been documented by the UN, by Amnesty International, by other NGOs, that is supposed to induce the death of civilians. I don't know why nobody seems to ever care about this. Hamas in the Gaza Strip exclusively fights in civilian clothes. Do you acknowledge that?
I was not familiar with that.
You don't care.
How are you not familiar with that? You've been talking about this war for months. You don't know if Hamas fights in civilian clothes or not? How are you not familiar with that? What?
Hamas in the Gaza Strip exclusively fights in civilian clothes. Do you acknowledge that?
I was not familiar with that.
You don't care. Hamas will fight from hospitals. Do you acknowledge that?
They don't fight from hospitals.
How? They don't fight from hospitals? It took the IDF had to siege Al Shifa for 2 weeks to kill a bunch of civilians?
But what happened with the most recent raid on Al Shifa?
Okay, so you've actually gone. No. I'm going to address this. I'm going to address
this. You're going to address it because you're not. But so let me just get my thing.
Well, I mean, he said he doesn't think that they fight from hospitals. But he just said no. He doesn't think.
Yeah, but I just want to just for people listening, I guess. One of the frustrating things about asymmetrical warfare is that as law around conflict has evolved past the 90s, the collapse of the Soviet Union, states are having to do more and more fighting against non-state actors, which has posed a huge challenge to the ICJ and the ICC in terms of how you analyze this conflict. And the reason why it's such a challenge is because international law only works if it allows countries to effectively operate so that countries will want to follow it. So international law tries to balance, for law of armed conflict, two very, very delicate things. One is the protection of overstate combat peoples, people that shouldn't be killed ever. And then the other is a state's ability to conduct warfare. Because if you deprive either of these, if you don't protect civilians, everybody dies. And if you deprive a state of the ability to defend itself, nobody follows law of armed conflict. The issue with Hamas as an asymmetrical opponent is every single behavior that they engage in is meant to induce maximum civilian casualty. That means that they exclusively fight in civilian uniforms. It means that they operate out of civilian, supposed to be special protected areas like hospitals. The Al-Shifa raid recently is a good example of that. They booby trap corpses. They booby trap houses. This happened a lot in Protective Edge in 2014. Amnesty International reports show that. There was footage taken out of Al-Shifa Hospital in 2008. Amnesty International did a report on that there was an interrogation center in there. And we saw captured CCTV footage that showed hostages being brought into Al-Shifa Hospital.
I feel like when I talk about these things, I feel like I bring up a lot of either historical or precise examples from things that have come up, and then I cite the agency that reports it. I feel like when they respond, they go like, okay, but also the IDF has done a lot of bad things over this war. And it's always like the most general shit, like ever. How can I lay out all of these things and not have a single factual point refuted ever?
That Hamas will store munitions and they will fight even from zones that are supposed to be declared safe, and they store ammunitions in places like mosques or homes. All of these behaviors are designed from the Hamas perspective to induce the maximum amount of civilian casualties, and then when it happens, nobody has anything to say with Hamas and everybody has something to say with Israel. Why hasn't Hamas, by the way, these are also considered failures to uphold your duty under international law. Why hasn't Hamas tried to protect the civilian population? All those tunnels they built, they couldn't build one bomb shelter. Why hasn't Hamas tried to set up a humanitarian area? Why is it exclusively on Israel and the international community, and Hamas can't do any type of collaboration or cooperation to do it? It's because they don't care, because the goal is to induce the maximum amount of civilian casualties.
One tiny point: if they did build a bomb shelter for civilians, Israel would bomb it and say that look, they're.
Look at what he just said. If they did build a bomb shelter, if they built if they built one bomb shelter, the fact that you even start that sentence off with "if" should be a huge indicator that something is very fucking wrong here.
They're putting civilians in the tunnels.
And if it would happen, that would be the end of the conflict. Because if there is a civilian bomb shelter built and there were no Hamas military and Israel hit that, then it's over. Because at that point, who supports Israel?
They're bombing entire neighborhoods.
No, they're bombing entire neighborhoods. Oh, and then he just, did you just ignore? They're bombing entire neighborhoods? Which ones? The houses that they store munitions from? The hospitals that they fire out of? The ones where they tell civilians to stay put so that they get killed by Israel? The ones where they operate in civilian uniforms? The ones where they booby trap the houses? Those neighborhoods? How can he just snowboard over the entire mountain of shit that I just said? And he's like, well, they would bomb him anyway.
Let's get Omar's response to the hospital.
You've gone through a lengthy record. Allow me to do the same, actually, for just 1 second. One of the things that you had actually said recently, I think it's on the Comedy Cellar podcast, is that it is quite blatant.
I don't get a response to any of that. Do people notice? I'm so curious of like their default fans, or maybe people in the center. They notice it. Like he just doesn't have a single thing to say to anything that I just said. Not a single thing.
That you had actually said recently, I think it's on the Comedy Cellar podcast, is that it is quite blatant to you. He said patently obvious that Israel's doing everything it can to protect civilians in Gaza.
Or I think I said more than any other country ever has in the history of armed conflict.
Yep.
Yes.
I think we have.
Go ahead, Omar.
Oh, actually, it turns out we do have it.
Why do they have this clip? What the fuck?
It seems, if you engage with it honestly, and I hate to say this because it sounds very partisan, when you engage with it honestly, it seems obvious, like patently obvious, that Israel is doing everything they can to minimize civilian casualties. It's like undeniable, because the numbers would be so much different if they were just indiscriminately bombing or carpet bombing, as everybody says. So, but I mean, they still have to manage the PR aspect, because at the end of the day, perception is really the only thing that matters in international communities with other countries. So,
frankly, the claim that Israel's doing everything it can to minimize civilian casualties is by far the single most absurd thing that I have heard Stephen say, period. Let me run through the record for you.
But then it's like, okay, well then justify that. How can you just like say arguments with no justifications? It's like you learned all about conclusions, but you skip the class on premises. Like, yeah, if you assert something as a priori truth, if you assert something, as like, oh, well,
okay. Get a soldier at his house at night, if that was your goal.
And with the thing that you mentioned with Lavender, it's specifically when they're at home. But beyond that, just if I can run through that record.
1 second, though, quick. Do you stand by saying everything?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
The more
Back to Omar.
more than any other country ever has in the history of all of armed conflict.
Perfect.
Sure.
So let's run through the record. Human rights organizations, who are the objective observers on these situations, every single one of them in every subsequent invasion of Gaza, including the current one, talk about Israel engaging in massive indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas. They talk about flattening entire neighborhoods. They talk also about deliberately killing civilians who pose absolutely no threat to Israeli soldiers. They go through and describe these incidents. They raise them with the Israeli military. The Israeli military says we investigated, we saw that nothing wrong happened. And human rights organizations' assessment of the way that Israel conducts itself is that it's completely in violation of international law, and that their self-accountability is a complete sham. It's not actually serious. And then you look at what Israeli leaders themselves also say. And by the way, that 972 magazine, there was a article. There was one that came before it as well, in which they described that Israelis' policy in Gaza is to basically shock the civilian population by doing massive devastation in civilian areas as a means of putting pressure on Hamas. And that included an example that they listed, toppling a high-rise residential building without warning on top of the people who are inside it. So that's
a name for it.
And that's that's based on power targets.
Power target, yeah.
And that's based on interviews with Israeli intelligence officers about Israeli policy in Gaza. And it's long been stated Israeli policy, frankly. If you look at people like Giro Island, Israeli general who later became the national security advisor in Israel, they talk about the policy being to punish the civilians and to induce so much suffering among them in huge numbers to put pressure on groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. And this is not new here, by the way. During the 2006 invasion of Lebanon, there is an incident in which Israel dropped 1 million cluster bombs all over towns and villages in Lebanon, prompting a high-ranking Israeli commander to say, quote, this is, you can find it on Haaretz, what we did was insane and monstrous. We covered entire towns and villages with cluster bombs. That's how they describe what Israel actually carried out at the time. And then you look at current Israeli statements right now from all of this. Benjamin Netanyahu has been quoted saying in Israeli press, again, talking about what the strategy is with Ron Dermer, and he said the strategy is to thin the population in Gaza down to a minimum. That's what he actually wants to do. He uses genocidal language like the Amalek, which is a quote from the Bible about murdering the children and babies of your enemies.
Amalek appears out to the Hague. The idea that it's exclusively used to describe animals is not true. But
and you have then Israeli soldiers themselves, so in case there's a misinterpretation of that, celebrating that they're going to kill Palestinians.
There's literally this idea that like the Amalek just refers to like subhuman, like horrible people. Like it's literally outside of the Hague, the International Criminal Court. Like the idea that this is like some horrible racist thing is just like fucking stupid. It's like, okay.
Palestinian civilians, they're chanting about the Amalek and how we're going to destroy them. And you have people.
It's just like yap after yap after yap. Okay, let's get some facts. Like okay. Oh no, I think I counter this at the end of this.
Are actually posting videos of themselves talking about we're killing them by the tens of thousands. Isn't that great? So that's the rhetoric of Israeli soldiers themselves on the ground. Then they're caught on tape shooting children in the head when they posed absolutely no threat. It happened in Jenin, even in the West Bank during this current crisis.
Do you think you should interrupt them more? It feels like you're always very generous letting them speak. I feel like if you start getting interruptions, it turns into a shit show. I don't think I can do this. What stuff are you writing down? I usually just write down like 1 or 2 keywords so that when that's why I'm looking at the paper so much, because when I'm responding, I'm trying to hit every single talking point that they said, is because I'm writing down like things relating to what he's yapping about right now.
Where you saw 2 young children being shot.
What is this quote about thinning the population? It's some bullshit fabricated quote that there's no source for, that doesn't make any sense, and it's just another fucking meme.
The head, with basically very obviously posing no threat. You saw in Gaza a grandmother holding the hand of a young child while carrying a white flag, and they shoot her dead while the child is holding her hand, and the child freaks out and everybody else runs away. You have a pattern that is documented on video of these kinds of crimes. You have American doctors who visit Gaza and talk about the horrors they see in hospital, how there's countless children who come in with single sniper bullet wounds to the head. They can't keep track of how many of these are coming in. And you have the President of the United States Joe Biden describing Israeli bombings of Gaza as indiscriminate. The idea that you can look at this mountain of evidence between what human rights organizations are reporting, what Israeli leaders are saying, what Israeli soldiers are posting of themselves, and what the American government's assessment of that bombing is, and to say they're doing everything they can to minimize civilian casualties, is just so thoroughly dishonest on behalf of an apartheid government that is committing atrocities before all of us. It's just, it's mind-boggling. Steve, you honestly would have to be either naive to believe that or dishonest, and you just don't strike me as a naive guy. You're a very smart guy. I don't understand how you can actually say that.
It's just funny because the entire yap you just did is completely destroyed by a single question. How do you explain the numbers? How do you explain the ratio of even what Hamas has claimed?
I think it's
70% to women and children. How do you explain that percentage?
Women and children? Hold on, I'm sorry. Because for children, we're saying 18 and under, as opposed to the traditionally fighting ages where we would usually talk about these conflicts. But everything when it comes to Palestinians, there's special rules.
You can bend this however you want.
It's not bending. No. I'm asking.
Like, I don't even get. Well, bro, he just went on like a 5-minute yap. I don't even get to start to respond. What the fuck? He just went on a 5-minute yap.
How do you explain the fact that even Hamas admitted, I think it was 7,500 or 8,000 of the people killed were
I don't remember what their exact numbers are.
So I have an analysis from March 12th. So this is from Just Security. As of this date, the IDF reported 29,000 airstrikes in Gaza. At that date, the number of reported civilian deaths in Gaza was roughly 29,200. The number of Hamas fighters killed in action has been claimed by the IDF and Hamas, both without evidence. The IDF claims 12,000 fighters killed, while Hamas claims 6,000 fighters killed. So we can look at those numbers given the demographic data from the Health Ministry. Out of 29,200 deaths, about 9,700 were men, and the rest were women and children. If the IDF claim is true, this is equivalent to every man being killed in Gaza being a Hamas fighter and several thousand women and or children being Hamas fighters. This is extremely unlikely, but to be extremely conservative, I will use the IDF reported Hamas casualty numbers, 12,000. We give a lower bound on civilian deaths in Gaza. In addition, we need to subtract deaths that would normally happen for this population, so about 4,900 deaths per year on average, equivalent to about 1,800 in a 4.5-month period.
I have no idea what the source for this analysis is. I will say, though, you always have to be careful. Children is a very, like, Western concept. In the West, for us, if you're 18 or under, you're, like, totally fucking safe. You're the most harmless butterfly. Like a 17-year-old is just like skipping and doing like hopscotch and jump rope and that's it. But like in the rest of the world, especially in the rest of the fighting world, right? Like boys are given arms sometimes is crazy. It is as early as 7 or 8 years old, right? This is seen in Yemen. But definitely once you're like your teenage years, 13, 14, 15, like of course like these people are being armed and they fight. So the idea that like you've got, teenage boys that are 15, 16, 17 years old that are armed and like out there fighting and then they get killed. And I was like, oh no, like children deaths. Like it's tragic that people are being armed and are fighting at a young age, that's for sure. It was tragic to draft 18 to 22-year-olds for World War II. Those are children, really. But like, yeah, this stupid, they always do this hand-wavy thing because remember, they're going for the normative baggage. When they say a child was killed, they're not trying to refer to an age. They're invoking the concept of childlike innocence. A 17-year-old being killed, when you think of a 17-year-old, you think of a kid with acne who goes to school with a book bag slung over one shoulder who's scared to talk to girls. That's a child that's being killed. You don't think of somebody who might have been doing weapons training for 3 or 4 years that's engaged in active military conflict, right? So it's trying to pull in this normative baggage of what a child is in order to make it feel like every single person under the age of 18 was like a kid in math class being sniped by an IDF, monster.
This gives us a minimum number of civilian war deaths of approximately 15,700. Based on 29,000 airstrikes, that leads to an average of 54 civilians killed per 100 attacks. And just lastly, this analysis goes on to say, despite the alarm over the high rate of civilian deaths in Raqqa, one finds the minimum equivalent in Gaza, 54 civilians killed in 100 attacks, is 8 times greater than the Air Wars-based estimate and 32 times greater than the DoD estimate. And recall that 52 number is a lower bound for the Gaza ratio. It is likely far higher than this. So, Stephen, do you dispute the validity of those numbers?
What was the ratio of fighters on the lower bound? What was the ratio of fighters to civilians there? Did it say Hamas claimed 6,000?
6,000.
Yeah.
So and the death total at that time was how much?
29,200.
About 9,000 men total.
So 6,000, and it was 29,000 total deaths.
29,200 total deaths, 9,700 were men.
So if you're taking that's the Hamas reported number, you're at 1 militant to 4 civilians. And that's for the Hamas reported number. How can the ratio be so horrible if Israel is on a genocidal, indiscriminate campaign against Hamas?
Yes,
how can that possibly be the case?
They're doing it again in slow motion to give plausible deniability that this is happening after
this
war.
Is a joke.
It's obvious. Look, they've destroyed.
It's everything. This is the best genocide ever. It's a genocide that's so fucking effective and so fucking insidious. It's not even killing the population. It's such an amazing genocide. We began the genocide in 1990 when there were only 1 million of them, and we're still genociding them today when there are 2 million of them. And in 2050, once the Palestinians have taken over the entire world, no one will suspect the genocide because they're everywhere. Like, what are we talking about? This is like Schrodinger's genocide.
80% of the buildings,
no, they've displaced
90% of the population. Can you name any other conflict in which you've displaced 90% of the civilian population?
No, because usually they just destroy them. You think in Dresden they told the civilians to flee? Do you think in the Tokyo firebombing
they let them? I should have said that they let them flee. Technically, they did drop leaflets, but like, yeah, the 100,000 plus people killed in the Tokyo firebombings were not all militants. They were fucking civilians.
Nagasaki and Hiroshima, did we tell the civilians to leave? Can you acknowledge that what you just said was incredibly fucking stupid? That no, they don't tell civilians to leave first. Normally they just kill them.
Yeah.
Because we knew.
I need to hear an acknowledgement.
Because he thinks that's such a clever line. Let me explain something to you.
Not going to
I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm going to acknowledge it. Yes, they told civilians to leave, and then they dropped massive 2,000 bombs on the safe zones that they told the civilians to flee to.
There was one safe zone,
the beach or whatever. There have been countless incidents of them dropping. Now you're just lying.
I'm not. I looked it up. You look at all the data on all the safe zones. There's 4 hours of roads that they make safe per day where they guarantee travel. And then there's a beach that they have not attached.
There's a New York Times investigation and there's an NBC investigation. Both of them document the fact that Israel is bombing safe zones where they tell civilians to flee.
And Israel admitted this. Israel admitted this.
Hold on.
Israel admitted at CNN that intelligence indication that these places were safe houses for commanders of the Rafah Brigade of the Hamas terror
Notice how he didn't answer the question? Yeah, no shit.
Organization. This was back in December about bombing areas that were supposed to be evacuation routes.
Evacuation routes are not safe zones. There's been one official declared
safe zone.
Shouldn't Hamas not operate from there? I mean, we're talking again.
That's a good question.
I should have made him answer that. Should they not? Hello? Yeah. Maybe that'd be a good idea, Chief.
There's one zone. I wish I could remember. Is it Al? It's Al Mwa something. It's the beach.
They call me the snapper. Okay, because if you try to ask me a dumb question like that, I'm gonna snap back on you. Okay?
West of Khan Yunis or whatever. Nobody knows the name of it. This is the
Al-Mawasi. She looked it up for me. Thank God. I should have remembered the name of the speech. It's Al-Mawasi. I think I was calling it Al-Mawawi. I think it's west of Khan Yunis, right? Oh, it is. Al-Mawasi. Isn't that the capital of Yemen?
They told people to go to Khan Yunis would be safe there. They
did not. They absolutely
did not say
declare
that.
that Khan Yunis would be a safe zone. No, that's absolutely.
Why did they tell people to go there?
Well, initially because most of the combat operations were in the north.
Concentrate them and kill them there. Why else would they say go there?
If you're a Palestinian,
let me answer the question. Let me answer.
So they operations were in the north. Concentrate them and kill them there. Why else would they say
so
go
then,
there?
If you're a Palestinian
so
citizen,
are we
what should you
going to
trust?
see 20, 30, 40, 50,000 deaths soon then? Are we about to see like 100,000 Palestinians go up in smoke? That's what they're doing. They're hurting them all to one city so they can blow them all up.
It is
Wait,
unclear
but I
if
thought
they're going to
we
do
said
it,
they were going for plausible deniability. Now
Yeah,
they're hurting
yeah.
them to one giant kill zone and blowing them all up.
Yes, and now they're going to tell them that it's time to
It's almost like this is absolutely an incoherent plot that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. What?
relocate because we're going to invade Rafah and send them to places where there is no food, water, or shelter, and have them
And they're going to be on imminent starvation and death like they happened for the past 5 months.
It's going to be ongoing killing rate, killing them by the tens of thousands, and saying, "Oops, it's just war. Gaza's unlivable anymore. Too bad you can't support Palestinian life. People are starving. It's just all an accident." That they're doing
it's
it.
an accident.
They're doing
it's crazy that the numbers are
obvious,
so poor for a country that could kill so
Yes,
many more people. But they're doing things that no other country's done. Do you acknowledge that no other country does leaflets, phone calls to buildings, roof knocking sirens?
Yes,
you get that no other country's done that.
human rights organizations,
Hold on,
including
you're not going to answer.
He's not going to answer the question. He's not. It does it again. They won't answer the fucking question.
Calls to buildings, roof knocking sirens.
Yes,
you get that no other country's
human
done
rights
that.
organizations,
Hold on,
including
you're not going to answer that.
No,
either?
I'm
The U.S. cleared Mosul out. Other
what?
countries do it, yeah.
I mean,
No,
you
we've
literally
and
interrupt me.
before we went into,
You literally interrupt me to tell me I'm not going to answer
because you're
something.
not answering. You're rambling.
Okay, so Omar, go ahead.
You were saying no country has done anything like roof knockings and leaflets and all that. And when you look at what human rights organizations say about these, they say they're completely pointless because there's nowhere for these civilians to go that is safe. So you can drop a leaflet. It's a game, right? And like the fact that people like you fall for it, it's just kind of really embarrassing.
You still have no explanation for the ratio, for the 1 to 4 on the low road.
They tell civilians to flee because here we're going to be so nice and make sure that you don't die. And then when they flee, they kill them as
He has no explanation for it.
they're fleeing, or they kill them wherever they
The numbers
arrive.
are so disproportionate.
If you were a Palestinian, what would you do if you lived in
Probably go
North-
south to the whatever the beach was. I wish I had the name of it right now. But there's been one singularly declared safe area, and it's that beach.
How many Palestinians do you want to crowd into that, whatever that small beach?
I guess it's 1 point. However many
How
million.
many bathrooms are there? How much water is there?
And are you-
add
I
on
mean, it's
top of
better than
that-
getting blown up by a
Yes.
bomb. If you want the war to stop,
Yes.
how about just have Hamas leave
what if
and
you
release
leave?
the hostages?
Or
Why not that?
Israel could just stop bombing Gaza.
Why would
Or
Israel
down
stop
with
attacking an enemy
M2.
that committed the largest terror attack per capita in the history of the entire country?
It's a ridiculous double standard.
Wait, hold on, wait.
Yes.
Hold on. Do you think it's reasonable to tell Israel, hey, Hamas, I know that you guys did a little bit of a large terrorism against us and have been, by the way, which is a violation of international law, indiscriminately launching rockets for decades from this law, and every single one of those is a violation of international law because those are by definition indiscriminate, which by definition fail the distinction principle that is essential to law of armed conflict, one of the 3 prongs. So wait. So
I can't finish a single fucking sentence. He keeps trying to cut me off.
Israel needs to allow Hamas to stay there, who's been breaking international law of armed conflict for 20 years.
As opposed to Hamas allowing the Israeli government to stay there when they're breaking international law for even longer than that.
And I want to put a fine point on that.
Seriously,
No response. There's never the whataboutisms, the yapping.
Honestly, I want to get an answer to that. Why is it that you think that the Israeli government, having committed all the atrocities that they
Because
committed,
the Israeli government is a democracy that can be reasoned with. Their neighbors have reasoned with them. People have signed peace agreements. People have reached agreements with them. The Palestinians have not. And there's a reason, by the way, which you will never recognize, why all of the surrounding Arab states have abandoned Palestinians too. Because their history has been one of violence. That first they've been encouraged by the surrounding nations and used by them, and then now they've been abandoned once the other nations have used them
That's
up.
a racist anti-Palestinian
Racist? What happened in the 70s? Why did the Palestinians get kicked out of Jordan in the 70s? Why did the Palestinians assassinate the Jordanian king in 52 in Jerusalem? Why did the Palestinians get kicked out of Lebanon? Why does Egypt want to work with the Palestinians?
Do you believe he's a racist?
Why? No, they don't. He does nothing. He does nothing. We should have. I just want to slow down and I want you to answer every single fucking one of these questions. Like, what is the format? Maybe the only way to do it is with a host. I want you to tell me what happened in Jordan in 1970. I want you to tell me why the Jordanian king was assassinated in Jerusalem and by who and why. I want you to tell me what happened in southern Lebanon. I want you to tell me why Arafat was exiled from even Palestine. I want you to tell me, I want to hear every single one of these explained, and then you can tell me if I'm being racist. I just want an answer to these, but I can't. I just have to I got to yap through it, and then I get cut off, and then we don't even.
Racist, Omar.
Yes.
When he talks about Palestinians, nobody likes them and nobody wants them and nobody whatever. Yes, absolutely, that's a racist description.
Why do they?
I don't like. Let me be clear.
Yeah.
This distinction between there's a category of people who are racist, and a category of people who are not. I think that's a simplistic thing.
Why didn't you? Why did Egypt abandon them in their peace talks from 72 to 79? Why didn't What's the answer? I'm curious. What does he think the answer is? Are all the Arabs racist against Palestinians as well?
He just described is a racist stereotype. There's absolutely no question about it.
I don't want
to get into who he
is.
is.
To a lot of people that are pro-Palestinian. I understand history is traumatizing.
If you don't understand that the Egyptian dictatorship is collaborating with Israel to suppress anything that is Muslim Brotherhood affiliated, and that's why the reason they're collaborating against Gaza.
Was Nasser collaborating with the Israeli government when they locked all the Gazans in the Gaza Strip and didn't let any of them leave?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Steve, you do.
Does he have why won't you engage with this? And then he pivots to a personal attack. Why would he not engage with this at all?
The government when they locked all the Gazans in the Gaza Strip and didn't let any of them leave?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Steve, you do this thing constantly where you bring up random anecdotes that are completely irrelevant to anything that what I'm.
It's not random at all.
Sorry, I'm sorry. The reason why that wasn't random is because you applied today that the dictatorship in Egypt. First of all, you said dictatorship, very loaded. Yes, Egypt's had a history of dictatorships. You're implying that they're collaborating with Israel in a unique way.
Why can't I finish my sentence? Why do you keep cutting me off?
Yes, Egypt's had a history of dictatorships. You're implying that they're collaborating with Israel in a unique way. You're acting like they're collaborating with Israel in a unique way. And even from 48 to 67, when Egypt had control of the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians were still locked in the Gaza Strip.
Let's be clear about it.
Just kidding. It wasn't random
about
Just brought
something.
that up
All
for a
right.
particular
Let me be clear about something. Right now, this rhetoric, I'm going to let it go for now. The idea is looking at all the surrounding Arab governments who are collaborating with Israel. It's sign that they hate Palestinians. When you do opinion polling in any of these countries, all of them, including in Saudi Arabia, the overwhelming majority of the population wants to cut off any talk. They want to isolate Israel diplomatically. They don't want to deal with them. The people of the region absolutely oppose what Israel is doing to Palestinians. And the fact that you can cite a handful of governments in the surrounding area who all effectively belong to the U.S. orbit and operate under and get tremendous privilege and financial privilege and security privilege for collaborating with the United States, and to try to paint that as some sort of validation that they have anti-Palestinian sentiment, I think is completely ridiculous and ignorant of the dynamics that actually exist in the region.
Was this an example when Crystal said that he did a good job pointing out the tactics Destiny was trying to... Yeah, tactics. Yeah, history and fact are like fucking... it's like kryptonite to a lefty. Anytime you start talking real... I learned that, I think 3 or 4 years ago, even before I was on Vyvanse, that any single time a lefty says you need to read history, what they really mean is, I know that you haven't read the history, because if you had, you would be hardcore calling me out on this particular point. Because these motherfuckers hate history. They hate it. History is kryptonite to these motherfuckers. These guys live in tweets.
A region that I grew up in, by the way. What you have... Where? I grew up in Kuwait, Jordan, Yemen, Oman, and the United Arab...
The fact that he grew up in Kuwait? In what year? Kuwait? Hold up.
Emirates, and I visited Palestine on multiple occasions.
Gotcha. Wait, you grew up in Kuwait in what years? Was that when Arafat was supporting Saddam Hussein?
I was born in Kuwait in 1982, and I lived there until that war. Okay. And yes, when Arafat made statements in support of Saddam Hussein, that became the reason why many...
Yep, that's why your family got kicked out, and they were never allowed back, because the Palestinian leader supported Saddam Hussein. Oh, yikes. Yikes, fam.
Palestinians could not go back to Kuwait.
Yeah, which was a really big deal too, which is also funny because those Oslo Accords, we point to Israel not being a good partner for peace. Only reason why those Oslo Accords were so horrible is because Arafat was desperately looking for a way back into Palestinian popularity after supporting Saddam Hussein when he expelled...
Yep, when your family got kicked out, that was why those Oslo Accord negotiations were bad.
Oslo, yes, and you know what was also happening, and the reason why Oslo happened is because while Arafat was looking for a way to get validation as the leader of Palestinians and come back, Israel was dealing with the fact that there's a Palestinian uprising, the first intifada, overwhelmingly non-violent, in which Palestinians were doing civil disobedience, sometimes throwing rocks at soldiers, and Israel was brutalizing them for year after year. After they killed so many of them that the Israeli officials started being concerned about the optics of it. So they just said, don't kill them, beat them up and break their arms instead. And what you ended up with...
I'm so curious.
And what you ended up with...
I'm so much more
And what you ended up with... Allow me to finish. You have to let me finish my thought every now and then.
Yeah.
I like how when I try to like get in here, he actually shuts me down. Are you serious? I get interrupted so many times in this debate. He's like, hold on, you gotta let him finish. Like, oh, he's like captivated by this guy talking. Seriously?
I'm so curious.
And what you ended up with...
I'm so much more...
And what you ended up with... Allow me to finish. You have to let me finish my thought every now and then.
Yeah.
And what you ended up with...
Every now and then.
I understand. We get it.
They started beating up Palestinian protesters and seeing them brutalizing them and breaking...
And they never even have like real points to bring up. We're not even having a debate, right? It's like, hey, how about this? Fact. And they're like, so what about the time when Israel shoots off the legs of small children and then the hospital doctors look at them from the West and they say, oh my God, there are children with sniper bullets. And you're like, okay, well, what about this? Like, fact. And then in Lebanon, they wrote in the diary, we need to stop bombing because there's so much death. Okay, well, what about, like, fact. Israeli soldiers bomb houses with the where's your daddy protocol to murder whole families at night. Like, okay.
Their bones on video, and that ended up being an even bigger disaster for Israel. And they did not know what to do with that civil uprising of people who wanted to be free from occupation. And so they struck a deal with Arafat and brought him in to suppress the Intifada on the fake and false promise that they might grant Palestinians a state. Arafat fell for it, and it was all a sham made
Arafat fell for it?
To suck the energy out of a genuine Palestinian uprising for freedom and to turn it into the fraudulent Oslo process in which Israel had cover to expand more and more settlements and entrench the occupation under the pretense of peace. That's the history of what happened.
So what could Israel have done after October 7th that would have been, and I don't want to lump you into this camp, some people said it's about proportionality. What could Israel have done after October 7th that would have either been proportional or given some of the legitimate points that Stephen made about a densely populated area where you have a military and a civilian population crowded into hospitals, et cetera? What could Israel have done? What should they have done after October 7th that would have been a just response?
And I promise I'll address that directly, but just on the context that you just described before that, you have a situation in which it's impossible to have a situation in which Hamas is fighting not in civilian areas. I mean, when you talk about the difference in power, one side has a full-fledged military, has air force, has tanks. Hamas can't just go out in the field and confront them directly.
Thank you.
You'd have to let me finish my sentence every now and then, Stephen, seriously.
Yeah, you have to, bro, you just cut, oh my God.
Try, in the words of Norman Finkelstein, try to have the self-possession to just listen a little bit more.
And in the style of Norman Finkelstein, be wrong about everything.
Yeah, great. You have a situation in which the balance...
Thank you, Emily. I needed that recharge.
The power makes it so that...
Finkelstein, be wrong about everything.
Yeah, great. You have a situation in which the balance of power makes it so that those militants have to effectively use guerrilla tactics, and guerrilla tactics involve hiding in civilian areas. That's how that actually that happens. And if you're really upset about that and you think that that's a real problem, by all means, arm Hamas the way you arm Israel, and then they can have military on military war, and we can spare the Palestinian civilians if you think that's really what's the underlying motivation. But of course, nobody would ever consider that. We only arm the criminals on one side with massive armaments. Now, on the question of what Israel should have done, there's two separate questions that often get conflated. There's the question of, is it a just war to begin with? And then there's the question of proportion. And you can imagine if people in Gaza were free and Israel was not controlling their lives and deciding how much food they get to eat and whether they can go and come back, and then some kind of attack happened, you might expect some kind of Israeli retaliation. And then the only conversation would be about proportionality. Are they doing it in a way that is defensible? And what they're currently doing is obviously not defensible, to be devastating the civilian population in order to thin that population, by the words of Israel's leader right now.
There's no source of that, by the way, which is it comes from the red line.
It comes from Israeli press reporting on internal strategic conversations.
Which has never been substantiated.
So yes, Israeli media makes things up.
When the population has always had a calorie surplus.
Yeah, even the diet part.
Calorie surplus.
They literally have. That's why when the famine started, when all the people were moved, I believe it was UNRWA that made the statement that this is a region that has never experienced hunger before.
That's what's so
He laughs at my statements, but they're factually 100% correct. Why is he allowed to laugh at me like that? And they're wrong. He's wrong. You can't laugh at me, sir. You are incorrect.
That's also why Fingleton got mad, because if you just type, really, wait, these people are starving? By what metric? You can't find
that's what's so infuriating, Stephen, is that you want to start counting calories.
And then he does this. He always does this every time I bring up a fact. That's what's so infuriating, how much of a meanie you are. It's so infuriating how much of a mean guy you are. You're so mean.
Try to discover whether they have a surplus.
Why does Ryan hate you? Is it because you called him out on a shitty report on October 7th? I don't actually think Ryan hates me. Ryan is actually incredibly polite. And actually, you know what? So is Omar. Both of these guys were very polite. As much as I got triggered as fuck debating with them, they are both super polite people. Ryan is incredibly polite in real life. Omar was really polite in real life. We shook hands afterwards. After this debate, Omar tried to give me I think we ended up staying for like 2 more minutes debating, because he was like, listen, Steven, I think you're a really smart guy, but I think you've been fighting with so many pro-Palestinians on Twitter, it's poisoning your mind. And then I said, actually, I think it's just because I did a lot of reading, and I think you guys lie about literally everything. And we started arguing for like a minute or 2 more, and then eventually we left. But both these guys are incredibly polite. So I will say that in real life, neither of them come off as like evil, mean people or whatever. So.
Or not, when you're missing the fact that Israel getting to decide what food gets into Gaza is itself outrageous.
Right.
One people does not get to control whether another side gets to have cookies for their children,
and you know
or potato chips or sodas. You don't get to do that. That's a level of dominance and oppression that is unacceptable.
But you're not capable of having it because you don't even admit why the blockade exists. So you don't even deserve to be in.
What do you want him to admit? What do you want him to admit?
Why is there a blockade in Gaza?
Yeah, you tell me.
Why is there a blockade in Gaza?
When you look at the fact that Israel's preventing cookies from going into Gaza,
What is that? That's not an answer.
That it's not motivated
Why
by
would cookies be
military.
prevented from going in?
And
what were
potato
Castle
chips.
Rockets filled with?
Yeah, with cookies? Yeah,
with sugar. And
Neither of them knew. They both looked at me like. They were like incredulous that could have possibly been an answer. They don't even have.
that it's not motivated
Why
by
would cookies
military.
be prevented from going in?
And
what were
potato
Castle
chips.
Rockets filled with?
Yeah, with cookies? Yeah.
With sugar and fertilizer. Yes, that's how they made the early rockets. The first generation that was
We're going to
literally
deny Palestinians in Gaza sugar because it might be used.
You know what?
First of all,
That's I truly don't think they know. Now they use more sophisticated rockets now, but the first iteration of rockets that were coming in the early 2000s from the Gaza Strip, yes, they were literally crude rockets where you would take a bunch of fertilizer, sugar, mix it, and then light it, and it would go. That's literally propellant, solid fuel, sugar, and potassium nitrate mix. The potassium nitrate mix, I think, came from fertilizer. Yes. What? Like, do you think? What is the alternative? Do you think they just banned cookies because they really don't want Palestinians eating Chips Ahoy? Like, what is the? What do you? Why? Why do you think it's happening? This is what I mean when I say you can't even engage with the argument honestly. Engage with why they're banned.
Actually, allow back in because he's more sophisticated, right? He's not going to admit it. I just want to be clear another time. Another thing you're not going to admit. Why does the blockade exist? It's literally just because of the evil Jews trying to kill the Amalekite.
Hamas fighters breathe air too. Maybe Israel can restrict air from going into Gaza to make sure that.
But he's saying then the burden should be on Hamas, not to use.
No, Palestinians have no agency.
No.
Rape is the language of the oppressed.
You don't.
They can't help themselves. The racist.
Yes, rape is the language of the oppressed.
Get military ones. You don't punish civilian populations.
Like indiscriminately shooting tens of thousands of rockets decade after decade into Israel, like what Hamas does. Punishing the civilian population, like selling some of the humanitarian food back to the population.
Just want to make sure.
Digging up tunnels of water pipes and using them to fashion rockets.
Just want to make sure.
All the international aid comes in and building tunnels and tunnels of cement.
Stephen, did you say that
Like
Hamas?
Jesus, there's no factual engagement whatsoever. Syria's rocket man put sugar into bombs. I don't think I've ever seen this video before.
With the precision of a master chef, Sheikh Omar adjusts the flame. In the pan, table sugar and a chemical compound bought locally that we've agreed not to name. It's almost ready, he says, as the color darkens.
Holy shit, it's Hamburger Helper.
Sheikh Omar, who doesn't want his face shown, has decades of experience in the art of war. He says he fought with the Palestinians and was detained twice by the Israelis in the 1980s. But they had more mercy than the Assad regime, he adds bitterly. Now he's using his training in weapons design that he got in Libya.
This amount, combined with another substance, is what he uses to make a single grenade. When it comes to making the propellants for a rocket, it's around 20 times this amount, and 2 more substances are included.
Sheikh Omar now works alone after his assistant was killed while they were experimenting. He's designed crude but effective grenades, and his biggest accomplishment, a sleek-looking rocket which he claims has a range of 12 kilometers.
Much of what Sheikh Omar uses comes from unexploded ordnance like this fired by government forces, and clearly marked on this rocket, made in Russia.
When he first started, Sheikh Omar tells us he would modify unexploded rockets. From here to here, for example, it's our adjustment. As our the fins, he says, we'd shoot one and it would just go 3 kilometers, or it would turn back around in our direction. Now he designs from scratch, mixing a substance he won't reveal, but that is imported from outside with the explosive he extracts from the government's artillery. He may be the master bomb maker, but Sheikh Omar says he's a man of peace. He wants to see a democratic Syria that reflects this nation's rich diversity, and he believes that after the Assad regime falls, there will be another
He's got actual sugar though. Is there actually a way to get sugar out of cookies to use in rockets? My guess is there's probably some chemical process, yes, to break out simple sugars from highly processed foods. That'd be my guess. I'm not Walter White. I don't know the actual process. We can try to look it up if you want. My guess is going to be, it happens in our bodies. My guess is going to be there's probably some way to dissolve or extract sugar from things that have sugar in them. That'd be just a guess. Just a guess. I could be wrong.
Hamas is turning cookies into missiles.
My understanding is the reason for the restricting sugar-based products was that the first generation, I think they were called Qassam rockets, were built in really crude shops using combinations of fertilizer and sugars that they would use.
You know what the primary component of Hamas explosives is now?
I'm pretty sure now they use more sophisticated stuff, but I don't know. You tell me.
Unexploded Israeli bombs.
How do you think they? I should. Oh, I didn't even think of that. It's such a stupid point. How do they get the bombs over the walls? They need to launch them. Do you think they throw them? Is the Gaza Strip full of NFL quarterbacks that are hurling these over the wall, Ryan? How do they get them over the wall? How do you get the unexploded ordnance over the wall?
Because
he's focusing on the warhead, not the delivery vehicle. I didn't even catch this in the debate, how stupid this point was.
So many over the last decade.
I doubt that's true. I'm sure they do.
With a 10 to 20% failure rate, Hamas then digs them up. The Yasin 105s that you see blowing up all these Israeli tanks, primarily fueled by Israeli explosives.
But I doubt the majority of them are.
There's
I'm sure there's some amount.
It's
but also, again, just to reiterate,
more so than cookies.
You're not going to tell me. Well, that's why cookies are no longer. Yeah, why does the blockade exist?
I'm going to tell you why the blockade exists.
Okay.
And the reason, by the way, why it includes banning cookies and soda pop and potato chips.
Yes, the Oreos aren't going into the Gaza Strip.
No, I'm sure it's very funny denying children the ability to eat chocolates and toys because they are Palestinian and not Israeli. That's just so incredibly.
Oh, the virtue signal. Oh.
Trivial, incredibly trivial.
The emotional
and potato chips.
It's working. We're two more virtue signals away from free Palestinian people. Keep going.
It's you trivializing. If it was the other way around, if Hamas was imposing a siege on Israel in which Israeli children are not allowed to do any of that stuff, you would not be sitting here making light of it. It would not be trivial to you because you understand that Israelis are human beings and their children deserve to eat potato chips.
Jewish people.
You do.
Jewish people live in Arab countries around the world.
I don't know the numbers.
They all left. How many? When we talk about the Nakba and the expulsion of Jews, how many Jews lived in the West Bank after 48?
Thank you for the deflection.
I'm deflecting. You literally said, I'm supposed to. He wouldn't imagine if Hamas owned Israel and the IDF or the Jews were in the Gaza Strip. Well, I can't even imagine that. And now it's like, well, how would you feel if Hamas was controlling Israel and they were restricting cookies into the Gaza Strip for Jewish children? Well, what the fuck, bro?
I'm just answering your
Let him answer about why the blockade exists.
He's not. He's got to do the 52 different talking points.
The blockade exists.
Oh my God. Okay.
The blockade exists because they want to punish the civilian population in Gaza.
Kill me.
Putting pressure
Kill
on
me.
Hamas. They're saying as long as we have a government in Gaza that does not play ball with Israel the way the Palestinian Authority plays ball with Israel in the West Bank, the civilian population is going to suffer as a means of putting pressure on them and getting somebody else to be in power. The evidence for that is overwhelming. Children's toys were not allowed in at the beginning of the blockade. And when Israel came under intense pressure after the flotilla incident, a bunch of activists tried to basically force medicines to be delivered to Gaza.
Force medicines? Force medicines? He happens to stumble into another thing. Thank you, Lycan, that I'm incredibly familiar with, and also gives a horrible bad faith summary of what that incident actually was.
Intense pressure after the flotilla incident, a bunch of activists tried to basically force medicines to be delivered into Gaza.
On the flotilla incident, there were 2 of 5 of the ships were empty, and they were aggressive ships that were designed to fight against the IDF when they landed. You realize that footage is available. There's 100-some people on the deck with chairs throwing Israeli soldiers overboard. And makeshift weapons and everything too.
Makeshift weapons. Wow.
I like how Ryan downplays everything. Oh, chairs. Oh, makeshift weapons. Can we roll that video clip? Hello? Can we roll a video clip of the people fighting and throwing the IDF overboard? I like how it's all downplayed on the Israeli side.
Yeah, I know. Well, that was all they could bring from Turkey with them, I guess, because they were inspecting the boats. But those were not peaceful activist ships. And if you read any of the reports, if you open more than a Finkelstein book and read what actually happened or watch any of the footage that actually happened,
were on that flotilla.
Were they part of the fighters or were they?
Listen to yourself. Listen to yourself.
What? You can watch the videos.
There were people who, yes, fought back when Israel boarded their ship in an act of piracy in international.
They didn't just fight back. They were ready. They were ready to fight back. By the way, I wish I could have. This was the peaceful, these were the peaceful protesters at the IDF. First of all, they cut the first rope, just to be clear. They cut the first rope of the helicopter. So this guy's down here. Here's the peaceful activists that are just chilling with, they've got metal pipes that they've cut out from the boat. They've got chairs that they're using to fight people. I think one of them had a pistol because supposedly one of the IDF soldiers had a 9mm bullet inside of him. Here's the pipes that they're fighting with, where they're trying to attack the IDF soldiers that are landing. This is in the middle of the night, by the way. Here's chairs that they're throwing at them. Let's see if we go a little bit further. I think we can see these peaceful activists, by the way. These were the peaceful activists. We've got one IDF soldier being thrown off the boat. Holy shit. Peaceful activists, by the way.
Why did Israel border the ship?
Because they don't want ships to get to Gaza.
There you go, because there's a blockade and because they announced you need to stop.
They don't get to impose that blockade.
They absolutely do.
No more than Hamas gets to impose a blockade on Israel. This is ridiculous. Of course they don't get to decide what ships get to go.
I want to reiterate by the end here. He's saying that the blockade exists because Jews are evil to...
No, he's saying they're intentionally...
That's a despicable thing to say.
Really?
I'm not saying anything about Jews. I'm talking about the Israeli government policy.
What? You can't... Okay, I'm curious. In the Second Intifada, were submersibles or weapons brought in via that via the water into the Gaza Strip? Did that happen?
What are you talking? Say that one more time.
Were there weapons that were shipped into the Gaza Strip via the Mediterranean?
And plenty of weapons were shipped into Israel as well.
I like the diversion. I like the pivoting.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
so there were things. Wait, so do you think the blockade?
I can't ask a question. I can't finish a single sentence. I can't.
Why is it that Egypt has been a partner with Israel in that blockade since its inception as well?
I've already explained to you why the Egyptian government is interested in restricting
because for 20 years they've just been people. Yes. Okay. Everybody is a. This is consistent at least with history that everybody is collaborators with the West and
governments that are transparently collaborating with the West
has hypnotized the world, even the Egyptian dictators or everybody. Yes, everybody.
I just want to say something. Honestly, there's one thing that I think is really, really important. This, just saying the Jews are evil.
Oh, another virtue signal. Thank God. Let's please get away from the history and let's go back to the virtue signal talking points. Thank God.
It's such a despicable line, and let me explain why. Anti-Semitism is a very, very serious and rising problem in the country, in many other places around the world, and especially in the Trump years. We've seen these shootings that have happened at synagogues and everything like that.
Not in the Middle East, it's always been at 100%.
And you have a situation in which Israel's defenders constantly try to conflate those things, is that you ignore the fact that there's a significant portion of the progressive young American Jewish population that is opposed to Israeli policies. And every time you criticize Israeli policy, people say, oh, you're attacking Jews, and that's exactly what you just did. And it's not just harmful to people like me who get smeared by that accusation, completely baseless and really ugly and detestable.
Probably more
but
true
it's
than
also,
we know, I think. But yeah.
That's, yeah.
Of Omar?
Thank you, thank you for that wonderful speculation. But it's also
I like how all three of them like handshake me for like accusing me of being anti-Semitic when he's called me like saying racist talking points like 3 times because I'm spewing historical fact. Okay, Chief.
Really harmful to Jewish communities themselves that are trying to protect themselves from anti-Semitism to constantly trivialize that charge, that you throw it around at anybody who's critical.
And then the next day, by the way, he's literally retweeting Saka Groiper account, but it's all coincidence, coincidence, I think.
Israeli policy, anybody who thinks that Palestinians are human beings who deserve to have rights, you water that charge down so much when you let it around that real anti-Semites get more room.
Do you really think Omar is anti-Semitic? I'm going to be honest. This is a rare moment of vulnerability and honesty for me, okay? And it's why I need to stop covering this Israeli-Palestinian fucking cuck bullshit, dumb fucking conflict, okay? Yeah, I'm starting to look at a lot of people who are Muslim or with Arabic names that talk about this conflict. I don't fucking know when I look at a lot of these people. I truly cannot tell because the anti-Zionist talking points and the anti-Semitic talking points are like a fucking circle Venn diagram in terms of their overlap. Instead of Jews controlling the world, it's Israelis controlling the world. Instead of Jews having the ears of every single leader and controlling the militaries of everything, it's Israelis controlling the military everywhere. Instead of Jews trying to take over and oppress everybody, it's Israelis trying to take over and oppress everybody. It's like, the talking points are the exact same. It's just applied to Israel instead of Jews. Ignoring the fact that Israel hosts some of the most brutal criticism of itself. Again, Haaretz and B'Tselem are from Israel, right? There are NGOs that operate in Israel, against Israel. Like, it's... Yeah, I don't know, man. When I look at a lot of these talking points, I can't really tell. I'm not sure, man. If I was Israeli, I would be mindfucked. I would assume that every Arab person is anti-Semitic. That would be my fucking assumption, but I'm not. I'm an American, so I have a more balanced point of view, so I'm only like 50% in that direction right now.
To breathe and operate because that charge doesn't mean anything. So even if you enjoy smearing people like me and people who defend Palestinians, that's fine. But if you have any part of you that actually cares about Jewish people in this country, I would strongly advise you to stop throwing that smear around at people. Because
okay, I'll do my virtue signal since you did yours. I got asked an interesting question on my way up here from the, is it Max?
Mac, producer Mac.
Not
Yeah.
Not Max, Mac.
might call
He
Mac
asked me why I was so interested in this conflict. And one of the things that I think is so sad is I think of all the things that I've ever looked at my entire life, this is one where you can pick and choose facts from one side and you can build the most compelling anti-Palestinian argument, or you can build the most compelling anti-Israeli argument. And I don't think I've ever seen anything where you can have such a one-sided telling of the history as I have for this particular conflict. I think the really sad thing here is that I think that there are really good criticisms that can be made of Israel. I think there are really good criticisms you can make of their past policy. And I think that the story of the Palestinian is an incredibly empathetic one. I think that there are reasons why you could support violence in 47, violence in 48, wars in 67. I think you can support all of these things from a really empathetic, understanding place. But the issue is that both sides are so invested in telling their story and making money and making videos and making whatever off of their particular side of things that you never will ever have that conversation. So, for instance, this is why identifying root causes is so important. When we talk about the blockade exists because during the Second Intifada, there was a lot of weaponry that came in to Gaza from the Mediterranean and from Egypt. This is a problem that Egypt recognized, this is a problem that Israel recognized. That's why the blockade existed, especially after the Palestinian Authority was not able to bring Hamas under control, and Hamas gained control of that region. Israel said, well, fuck this, we're going to...
On point. I don't want to interrupt you, just there's one thing.
Yeah?
So before the flotilla incident, they were not allowing certain food items from going in and children's toys.
Well,
and
it's 2008, right?
Yes,
We're talking
that's right. Yeah, no, but it's just, I want you to explain to me. And then after that incident and Israel came under pressure, they started allowing a little bit more humanitarian stuff to go into Gaza. Is that because Hamas stopped being a threat to Israel, or is that because those humanitarian goods are actually not a threat and Israel did not give a shit about them anyway, apart from wanting to punish them?
My guess would be it's probably because the Israeli restrictions were too much, and they probably could have calmed the fuck down.
Oh, I shouldn't have even conceded that point. The real truth is there was probably that element, but also in the background, the Iron Dome was becoming more and more sophisticated as well, which probably also played into it. And I should have focused on that as well. The fact that Israel has gotten so good at defending themselves from these attacks means that they could loosen up the restrictions, not because the rocket attacks stopped. But that's okay. We can grant a little bit on the other side since I've been so aggressive, I guess. But.
Right now, Israel is in the position that it's in because Israel thinks that they can maintain an indefinite status quo and more or less slowly annex the West Bank. That's Israel's goal. The problem with this conflict has always been that Israel wants to fight forever because the longer they fight, the more of the West Bank they get to annex. The only reason the Abraham Accords happened was because it was to stave off annexation of the West Bank. And the problem is that while Israel wants to continue fighting to gain more and more, people like you have deluded Palestinians and think that they fight, they can gain more and more too. Only one side, Palestine, whatever that means.
Let me finish.
Only one side in this conflict. What does it mean to you?
Palestinian?
There are a lot of people who became Palestinian after, depending on what the conflict is. So I don't know what that means. I don't really care that much. The idea that both sides can continue to fight only serves one side, and that's the Israeli side. The longer the Palestinians continue to fight, the more the Israelis are going to gain. Because the reality is the Arab states around them are bored. They don't want to fight. The leadership doesn't want to fight anymore. They're not going to. They did at one point, which is I think the most tragic thing, is that Palestinians were a tool of the surrounding Arab states to fight with Israel, and that's the most they ever cared about. That's why if you go to these surrounding countries and you ask, that's crazy. There are so many Palestinian refugees here. I wonder why they don't ever take any of them in as actual citizens. And the reason why is because in the Arab states, you're not allowed to. They don't give citizenship to those people because they use them as a tool to fight with Israel. And that's why they're not even allowed to do it. They're banned from actually giving citizenship to any of these Palestinians. So even the whole refugee crisis is inflated more than it should be. But the issue is that when you look at these sides and you go to criticize the policies, okay? I bring it back to the blockade. That blockade existed because weapons were coming into the Gaza Strip via the ocean, via the land routes. So if that's the reason why the blockade came in, I think that you can make an incredibly powerful argument that, listen, Netanyahu, if you want to destroy Hamas, that's fine. But one of the conditions of eliminating Hamas has to be the lifting of the blockade. Because with Hamas gone, your justification for the blockade is completely and totally non-existent. In my world. In your world, the blockade never leaves because the only reason it's there is to punish Palestinian citizens. So if you're constantly screaming at a government, hey, you need to take this blockade away because you just hate Palestinians, well, why would they ever remove it? There's absolutely no desire to, there's no reason to, why would they? But if the argument is, well, we said that the blockade existed because weapons were going into a hostile administration, well, now that hostile administration is gone and we allow you to remove it at great cost, both to infrastructure and civilian life, well, now we can say, hey, they're gone, you have to lift the blockade now. There's no justification for it. So if we have a real analysis of what's going on, we can levy legitimate criticisms, we can look for legitimate solutions. But if the arguments are delusional, that Israel is here indiscriminately...
I'm glad they let me get this whole point out. I wish I would have had this. I need to do a moment like this early in the debate. The reason why it's so important to understand why the sides are performing bad actions is because if we understand where the root causes of those bad actions are, we can take corrective actions against those bad actions. If the accusation is they want to kill Palestinians because they're evil and hate Palestinians, well, what's the correction then? To make them not hate, you're fucked. But if the actions are these other things that are not intractable, things that can actually be fixed and solved, then, then we've got good reasons to say, hey, you can do this, but now you have to do this, right? Because it logically follows.
Murdering tons of people because they're evil or because they hate Jews or they hate Palestinians or hate Arabs or whatever, or they're racist or Islamophobic, there's no solution to be had because in your world, the hatred runs so deep, it's intractable.
Crystal's lipstick just fell over. That's all it was.
Yeah. So it's funny. Some bits of that narrative actually were kind of close to reality, but just let me fix a couple of things for you. First of all, if you're saying that a precondition for lifting the siege is that Hamas has to not be in power anymore, you have that backwards. The occupation of Gaza existed before Hamas was created. The occupation created Hamas.
Wait, when was
and
the
therefore,
blockade? The blockade wasn't since the occupation.
Yeah, I mean, the occupation itself needed to end. They replaced the occupation with the siege. That's what they did. And
no, the blockade started in 2005.
Yes. So they withdrew.
It's been occupied since 48.
It remains no. Gaza has been occupied since 1967.
Gaza's been occupied since 1948.
I will never let I don't care if this is pedantic, I will never let anybody get away with this fucking point. I will never, ever, ever let anybody, I hate this point, and I will never let anybody get away with this fucking point. It drives me crazy.
48.
It remains no. Gaza has been occupied since 1967.
Gaza's been occupied since 1948.
What are you talking about? Israel took over Gaza in 1967.
Who took over in 1948?
The Egyptians did.
Yes. So it was occupied by the Egyptians.
Okay. See, this is the.
I know you don't like to talk about that because it's not convenient, but that's true. It wasn't a Palestinian state prior to 67.
Who cares? The point is.
Who cares? The Palestinians were. They had a fake government for 1 year that was recalled to Cairo and immediately disbanded. And it became a training ground for Fedayeen.
You weren't allowed to leave the Gaza Strip from 48 to 67 either. You were also locked in there by the Egyptians.
Let me then call for an end to the Egyptian occupation of Gaza too. Oh wait, it ended. Great. So now let's talk about the Israeli occupation of Gaza. It started in 1967. It has continued, and all Israel did is withdraw settlers out of Gaza and replace that settlers on the ground with an occupation from the outside. That's why nearly every international organization still considers Gaza occupied, even after they withdrew settlers and placed it under occupation.
The lack of care of this highlights how it's less about Palestine and more about hating Jews or Israel or I don't know.
According to just about every UN agency, the EU, just the list goes on, and human rights organizations as well. And so the idea then that you need something to change and that Israel would lift the siege in Gaza, frankly, if Netanyahu came and said to Hamas, if you agree to no longer be in power, we're going to let Gaza be completely. You can have an airport, you can have a seaport, you can just like have the population live. I suspect Hamas might actually be up for that. In fact, they would consider it a feather on their cap. They can say, see, we've delivered something for you.
Absolutely. But they wouldn't even agree to a permanent ceasefire. What would you think
in exchange for Israel ending
the most Hamas has even acquiesced to is like a 10-year ceasefire. They haven't even if they got a two-state, I don't think they agreed to a permanent ceasefire.
Devastation of Gaza. They've offered it a million times to release all the hostages. Yeah, they've offered it repeatedly. And it's kind of funny.
Let me to be clear. You're saying that if Israel said they would end the blockade, that Hamas would step down as leadership?
If they were to leave Gaza, absolutely. I think that would actually happen.
Are you sure that the claim isn't that they need to have a 10-year truce or that they need to recognize a two-state solution where the refugees are brought back?
This is them as a governing body early on, when they were signaling that they're actually interested in moderating Khaled Mashal, the head of Hamas.
In the late 2000s. This was before they attempted to coup Abbas's Palestinian Authority, the PLO in the West.
They tried to form a unity thing with the PA, and then they immediately tried to coup the government like months afterwards when Hamas tried to join the Palestinian Authority's coalition in the West Bank. It's just...
I remember this right before the attempted coup.
You don't know what you're talking about. It's so incredible. There was an attempt actually at driving Hamas out of power that they then flipped and pushed the Palestinian Authority out.
You're talking about... I know. I'm sorry, I got this.
As part of a plot that was documented. I think it was Vanity Fair.
That's true, but you're talking about 2005. Yes. There was going to be international support for Fatah. Yes, but then Hamas tried to coup the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank a few years later, right after they announced their unity government.
It's great that you've done some reading and you can throw out random factoids. But
why does he get to say this to me, okay? Just because I know everything you're talking about doesn't mean you can dismiss my knowledge. He tried to conflate the two events, okay? When you talk about the attempted coup of Hamas, that was in the Gaza Strip after Hamas won the elections. But the later coup, when Hamas tried to form a unity government with the PLO for the Palestinian Authority, that was a separate coup. That was a separate attempted coup. That was not the same event. And he's so upset that I know both of these things, and he just says that I know random factoids? What? Because I read too much Wikipedia? Or like, I don't understand how you can both bully me for not knowing anything because I'm not an academic and I'm just a wiki retard, but then bully me for knowing the history and then making fun of me because I know what you're talking about. How do I get hit on both sides with the same person?
In the West Bank a few years later, right after they announced their unity government.
It's great that you've done some reading and you can throw out random factoids, but please listen to
it sucks when the history disagrees.
Please try to listen to what I'm saying to you so you can actually understand.
Go back to the broken bones.
Yes. Okay. I'm not trying to throw up random facts that I've read. I'm trying to explain something to you, and I really hope that you would actually just make an effort to listen to what I'm describing.
Okay.
There was an effort by Hamas at the time to try to moderate, and Khaled Mashal wrote a piece in the Washington Post here in the U.S. talking about how, we don't like the idea of a two-state solution, but if we put it to a referendum and Palestinians want it, we'll accept it and whatever. Like there's all kinds of stuff, signs, and what Israel did is put a suffocating blockade on Gaza and said you have to renounce violence, even though Israel does not renounce violence. They said you have to recognize Israel, even though Israel does not recognize Palestine, and they said you have to stick by all previous agreements, even though Israel was obviously not sticking to any agreements they had made with Palestinians in terms of just clearly entrenching the occupation left and right at every opportunity. And so Hamas said, no, those are not acceptable demands, and that's how we ended up being stuck in the situation where Hamas's refusal to accept whatever Israel wants to mete out to them is the reason why that blockade got entrenched and intense and became more and more punishing as a means of trying to place more political pressure on Hamas. And the idea that now if only Hamas would agree to XYZ, then everything would be great in Gaza, there's just no reason to believe that, because the occupation and what Israeli military officials and security officials and political officials were talking about when they actually withdrew from Gaza was very transparently a plot to deny Palestinian statehood. That they're saying this.
Okay, real quick, what would be the name for the if we had a debate strategy where you don't actually respond to what the person is saying, but then you you moralize or you do some other ramble afterwards? Think of like a clever, cute name for what we would call that strategy. Okay, when you refuse to engage. Oh no.
I sir.
Uh-oh.
I'm a little behind, but I'm just curious. With all of the thoroughness that you like to employ in this research,
Yep.
can you say for certain that sugar and sodas are then processed to extract the sugar, cookies and soda,